Hello everyone, today we talk about the Battle of Bergen, fought on April the 13th, 1759, near the fortified village of the same name close to Frankfurt am Main during the 7 Years' War. An important engagement between the Allied army under Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick and the French forces commanded by Victor François, Duc de Broglie. This is the first time I make a video on an 18th century battle. You know that we tried with the 17th century. The reason being essentially that whenever we take in consideration a battle, it was good custom, especially just by professional deformation specializing in medieval warfare and battles reconstruction, to look at every single source available. That is very challenging on YouTube for the Middle Ages alone, right? Especially for the later part. For ancient history, it's easier. But when we talk about modern history, things start really taking off. So the work behind this episode is wider, also somehow more scholarly based, meaning historiographically speaking, not just through primary sources. There are really many of them also present in archives, etc. So the methods change. I made some video explaining essentially what changes is historically and historiographically wise when we talk about sources, method, and research across different eras, for different eras as well. So let's treat this video as an experiment, even though I'm sure that it's going to work fairly well, and in any case we can't but improve evidently. So that experience is needed, as I really want to cover in depth 17th, 18th, well, in actually all the history of warfare, but really reinforcing especially our 17th, 18th battle series, so that it can pave the way and to also later centuries, and linking up the entire Schwerpunkt military historical content in a proper way. Battles are crucial as much as campaigns. As talking as we've normally done, like just modern warfare, mostly through, say, talking army organization or general military, but also political and social issues, can't be the only way, especially to build an actually strategical and tactical understanding of this phase, this era in the art of war. So, by the way, the Battle of Bergen is interesting, as we will understand, for a number of reasons, right? It's basically one of the few victories of the French against the Germans or the Allied army during the 7 Years' War. It's also a typically 18th century battle, one of the most typical, if you want, for many reasons, even though, as we know, there's no such thing like a mere battle type category. Right, but the setting, the culture, the commanders involved really exude that sort of enlightenment, but also partly still guerre en dentelle type of mindset and background and action, right, and proper combat, as we will see now. It's a secondary battle of the 7 Years' War among at least the bigger ones. So some of you may be familiar with it already, some wouldn't. We'll just go by the book here, giving a broader introduction to the political and strategical context, talking about the battle order, and just describing the battle as it tactically unfolded, and of course wrap it up like with the aftermath and broader considerations about the same. What is interesting, again, is that by this point in history, you can't really be very precise about what, every single regiment did, more or less, being more granular in the tactical analysis. Here, the map I use is basically the only one available, I think, on online, or at least, well, I could have made slightly greater research, but surely there isn't anything more detailed than that. In any case, as you know, we are here for the audio, right, for the explanation, not much for the visuals, that, however, I tried to, as always, make as accurate, fitting, and pleasant as possible. So the Battle of Bergen emerged from the broader strategic and political dynamics of the 7 Years' War, where Britain, Prussia, Hanover, and their allies sought to counter French ambitions in Western Germany, particularly in the electorate of Hanover and the strategical vital region of Hesse. The Battle of Bergen's prelude was shaped by French advances, Allied countermeasures, and the critical importance of Frankfurt as a logistical and political hub, setting the stage for, as we'll see now, the clash in a narrow, defensible terrain that will also literally channel substantial power with massive bloodbath from both sides, by the way, because this French victory was costly as well. Now, in the winter of 1758-59, France allied, as you know, with Austria and Saxony, aimed to consolidate its hold over Western Germany. To pressure Hanover, specifically, a key British ally, and to divert Prussian resources from the Eastern Theater, that, as you know, was sort of the most dynamic and sort of important in general, even just because of the school of Frederick the Great. We made different videos already about the old Fritz's Prussian army and all its different aspects of, for example, unity of command, tactical development, broader strategic philosophy, and just properly the needs that this war entailed. Following successes in 1758, such as the occupation of Kassel, the French capture of Frankfurt in early January 1759, primarily under the command of the Duc de Broglie, with support from the Prince de Soubise, established a major base for operations in Hesse and beyond, threatening Allied control of the region. Frankfurt's position on the Main River made it a critical supply and communication hub, enabling French forces to project power into central Germany. The loss of the city obviously had alarmed the Allied coalition, particularly Hanover in Britain, which feared further French incursions could destabilize their defensive lines and embolden Austria's efforts against Prussia. Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick, tasked with defending Hanover and disrupting French operations, resolved to counter this threat despite harsh winter conditions bolstered by British subsidies that enabled his campaign. His strategy hinged on severing French supply lines by recapturing Frankfurt or neutralizing its operational value. To achieve this, Ferdinand planned a rapid offensive, beginning with diversionary maneuvers in Hesse to confuse French commanders. To begin with, these feints aimed to draw French forces away from their main positions, allowing the Allies to strike unexpectedly toward Frankfurt all of a sudden. However, Broglie, an experienced commander, anticipated such a move and concentrated his army at Bergen, a fortified village astride the road to Frankfurt, approximately 20 kilometers northeast of the city. Bergen's strategic position, nestled between the Nidda River to the north and the Main to the southeast, made it a natural choke point ideal for blocking an Allied advance. The political context further heightened the stakes. For France, holding Frankfurt and Hesse bolstered its negotiating position in the war and supported its Austrian allies by tying down Prussian and Hanoverian forces. For the Allies, a successful campaign in Hesse could protect Hanover, relieve pressure on Prussia, and demonstrate Britain's commitment to its continental allies, crucial for maintaining the coalition's cohesion. The terrain around Bergen, a narrow plateau flanked by steep slopes, orchards, and sunken roads, favored the defender, with the village's fortified walls and the dominating Wartberg hill providing formidable defensive advantages. Broglie's decision to anchor his army there, using abattis in the orchards as a standard French tactic, reflected his intent to force a costly engagement on the Allies, while Ferdinand's underestimation of French strength, believing Bergen held only 2,000 to 3,000 troops, a plausible but unconfirmed assumption, drove his decision for a swift artillery light assault hindered by poor reconnaissance obscured by French skirmishers. A perfect trap that lured the Allies in Bergen. By April the 12th, 1759, Broglie's army, numbering around 30,000, with 450 light troops, 44 squadrons, 46 battalions, and 45 field pieces, including 4 howitzers, was encamped near Bergen, fortifying its position. Ferdinand's allied force, approximately 22,000 strong, with 1,900 light troops, 40 squadrons, 27 battalions, and 21 field guns, prepared to attack, assembling near Rostorf and Kilienstetten for a dawn assault on April the 13th. The stage was set for the battle, driven by the imperatives of controlling Hesse, securing Frankfurt, and shaping the broader war's trajectory, with both commanders poised to leverage the terrain and their forces in a great clash. Let's look at the orders of battle for, of course, both armies. The Allied force, as we've seen, approximately 22,000 men with 1,900 light troops in 13 companies, excluding Prussian hussars, was led by Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick. It comprised 40 squadrons, 27 battalions, 21 field guns, and about 46 battalion guns, with battalions averaging 600 men and squadrons 150 per April 1759 reports, reflecting a mix of Hanoverian, Hessian, Prussian, and British units, including British cavalry, like the Royal Horse Guards. The Allied vanguard included the Hanoverian Jägerkorps under Freytag, with 3 mounted companies of 240 men and 6 foot companies of 600, alongside 2 squadrons of Prussian Rouge Black Hussars. The first column, or avant-garde, under the hereditary prince had a vanguard led by Major General von Gilsa, consisting of a 100-man Hessian grenadier detachment, 4 squadrons of Hessian Leib-Dragoner, Brunswick Converged Grenadier Battalion Dene, with 2 companies each from Leib-Regiment and Imhof, a battalion Kram with 2 companies each from Zastrov and Baer, supported by 2 6-pounder guns and 1 12-pounder. The main force of this column fielded 9 battalions and 7 squadrons, including Brunswick's Zastrov, 2 battalions each of Imhof, Baer, and Leib-Regiment, Hessian Mansbach and Prince Anhalt, British 2nd, that is the Royal North British Dragoons with 2 squadrons, the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons with 2 squadrons, and Royal Horse Guards with 3 squadrons backed by 2 6-pounders, 2 12-pounders, and 3 howitzers. The second column on the left, under Prince von Isenburg with Lieutenant General von der Schulenburg, opened with a vanguard of Hessian Converged Grenadier Battalion von Mirbach, an ad hoc unit, 4 squadrons of Hanoverian Dachenhausen Dragoons, and 2 of Hammerstein Cavalry. Its main force, led by Major General von Urf, deployed 10 squadrons and 9 battalions from left to right, with Hessian Prince Friedrich Dragoons at 4 squadrons, Prussian Cavalry, Leib-Regiment Cavalry, and Prince Wilhelm Cavalry at 2 squadrons each. Hanoverian battalions Post, Linstrow, Monroy, Vrede, and Fersen, and Hessian battalions Prince Karl, Prince Isenburg, Kanitz, and Hessen-Anhau, supported by 11 12-pounders. The third column, commanded by the Duke of Holstein-Gottorp, with Lieutenant General Gramby, Prince von Anhalt, and von Wuttgnegau, had a vanguard of 4 mixed Hessian Jäger companies, a volunteer de Prusse detachment under Trumbach, 1 squadron of Prussian Rouge Black Hussars, and Hessian Grenadier Battalion Faust. The main force, arrayed right to left, included 10 squadrons and 5 battalions, with Prussian Holstein-Gottorp and Finkenstein Dragoons at 5 squadrons each, and Hessian battalions Garde, Leibgrenadiers, Erbprinz, Leibregiment, and Gilsa. The French army under Victoire François, Duc de Broglie, numbered around 30,000 with 450 light troops, as we've seen, 44 squadrons, 46 battalions, 1 artillery battalion, 45 field pieces, including 4 howitzers, and 66 battalion guns, including 16 Saxon, comprising regular, foreign, so Swiss and Saxon, for example, and mercenary units. French battalions averaged 450 men, squadrons 120. The right wing, led by Lieutenant General Prince Camille de Lorrain, with Major General Comte d'Orlik and Marquis de Saint-Chamond, held Bergen under Brigadier Clausen with 2 battalions, each of Planta Waldner, the Royal Suédois, and Royal Dupont. Behind Bergen, in regimental columns, so as readily expandable tactical reserves, stood 4 battalions of Piedmont, 1 of Royal Roussillon, 2 of Alsace, and 2 each of Castellas, Disbach, Rohan, Montbazon, and Beauvoisis. The French center, under Lieutenant General Comte de Beaupre, with Marquis de Castries, positioned artillery along a sunken road east of the Wartburg under Major General Chevalier de Pelletier, with Royal Artillery's Chabris battalion managing 45 field pieces, including 4 howitzers in 8 batteries, and Saint-Germain's battalion on the Berger Warte. Cavalry behind the Berger Warte included a Commissaire General Brigade with 2 squadrons, each of Commissaire General, Balincourt, and Arquiac, Lameth Brigade, with 2 squadrons, each of Bussy-Lameth, Montcalm, and Toussaint-Viré. Additional cavalry comprised Penthièvre Brigade with 2 squadrons, each of Penthièvre, Moustier, and Pulis-Saint-Thibault, and Dessalles Brigade with 2 squadrons, each of Dessalles, de Vienne, and Vauguet. The Dragoon Reserve included 4 squadrons, each of De Roy and La Ferronaille Dragon. The left wing, under Lieutenant General Baron von Deerne, near Wilbel, north of the Wartberg, fielded the 1st Saxon Brigade with single battalions of Garde zu Fuß, Kurprinzessin, Prince Friedrich August, Prince Karl Maximilian, Prince Joseph, and Prince Anton, and the 2nd Saxon Brigade with single battalions of Prince Xaver, Prince Clemens, Graf Brühl, Fürst Lubomirski, Rochow Fusiliers, and Prince Sachsen-Gotha, supported by 16 4-pounders and 4 squadrons of Abcon dragons. Cavalry included the Royal Allemand Brigade, with 2 squadrons of each Royal Allemand, Nassau-Usingen, Württemberg, and Cavalerie Liégeoise. The left wing reserve behind the Wartburg comprised Defend Brigade with 2 battalions, each of Defend and Enghien, Anhalt Brigade with 2 battalions of Anhalt and 1 of Berg, and Royal Bavière Brigade with 2 battalions of Royal Bavière and 1 of Nassau Prince Louis. Light troops included 450 Volontaires d'Alsace deployed as skirmishers in woods near Wilbel, with Chasseurs de Fischer at Friedberg and Eftingen Infanterie garrisoning Frankfurt. So we are on April the 13th. We've seen from the predisposition of the troops how predictably complex this engagement is going to be, because the forces are sizable. The defensive position of the French is quite solid, but the battlefield is also quite articulated, and of course the Allies have to go by degrees, right? Especially in finding out the actual size of the French forces, right? So as you have seen also already from the map, you have this fortified village in Bergen, again in the vicinity of Frankfurt, and this battlefield unfolding across a narrow, defensible plateau shaped by steep slopes, orchards, sunken roads, And especially, this is the main feature, aside from the main battleground, the dominating Wartburg Hill that strategically, of course, can be exploited to gain control of an upper ground just over the battlefield. And therefore, as secondary as it is, because, of course, the main armies cannot really fight up there, is also very crucial. And we'll see now how much back and forth there's going to be in this difficult terrain. Naturally, we'll carry out now some sort of comprehensive analysis of the engagement, looking essentially at what all these different units, of which we will also now specify the size, and also the condition during the engagement. We weren't specific about the unit size in the battle order section because we will be repeating a bit, as we will closely examine it now across the battle line in this more tactically useful fashion. At dawn on April the 13th, Broglie deployed his army. Imagine the air thick with a sharp tang of gunpowder from overnight campfires and the clatter of muskets and soldiers' checked flints. Think about the hype of these people and, the terrible future that they had the certainty to be facing in a while. Broglie's right wing, anchored on Bergen, comprised 23 battalions. We're talking something like 10,300 men, with 3,600 men constituted by the Royal Suédois, so basically 2 battalions, 900 men, the Royal Dupont, 2 battalions, again, 900 men, same for the Waldner and Planta, posted on the eastern side. Some men in the villages' walls behind stone barricades poked by priors, skirmishers, their 69 caliber Charleville muskets loaded with 30 cartridges each. Right, these guys have to hold, remember, the Allied onslaught. And others forming abattis in the orchards, hacking at apple trees to create jagged obstacles that funnel attackers into specific kill zones where they could be butchered down by musketry fire, and also the specific, even bayonet counterattacks. In good condition due to their fortified positions, these troops were confident of their capacity. 15 battalions, over 6,700 men, including 5 behind Bergen, were the Piedmont, 4 battalions, 1,800 men. The 1st Royal Roussillon, 1 battalion, 450 men. So at this point, all these units are fresh, as you understand. And other 2 battalions, the Alsace, that were 900 men fresh, with 8 more in reserves behind Castellas, Diesbach, Rouen, Montbazon, Beauvoisy, all fresh. For each of them, essentially, we're looking at 900 men, 3,600 bolstering the right, their ranks aligned in 3 deep linear formations, creating this thick layer of defense. Again, bayonet fixed for close defense, as they would have received, again, the enemy fury. The left wing of the French, anchored on woods along the Nidda, were tangled underbrush and muddy riverbanks slowed movement, masking the clink of Saxon bayonets, including 12 Saxon battalions, 5,400 men, so the Garde zu Fuß, Corps Prinzessin, Prinz Friedrich August, Prinz Karl Maximilian, Prinz Joseph, Prinz Anton, Prinz Xaver, Prinz Clemens, Graf Brühl, Fürst Lubomirski, Rock of Fusiliers, Prince Saxon Gotha, each 450 men. Ready to fight, 10 battalions, 4,500 men. The Fond, Enghien, Anhalt, these are all 2 battalions each for 900, in total of 2,700 men. The Berg, 1 battalion, 450 men. The Royal Bavière, 2 battalions, 900 men. In Nassau, Prince Louis, 1 battalion, 450. standing in reserve northwest of the Bergen positioned on open ground for rapid redeployment, their muskets priming for volley fire. 32 cavalry squadrons, that is over 3,800 men. Commissaire général Balincourt, Archiac, Boussy, Lamette, Montcalm, Toussaint, Viré, Penthièvre, Moustier, Polisson, Thibault, De Salle, De Vienne, Vouguet, each 2 squadrons, 240 men, forming a single brigade, armed with sabers and 60 caliber pistols at the ready. Horses pawing the soft earth of the moat, here supported by 1 battalion that were the Saint-Germain, 450 men deployed in the moat itself, while 12 dragoon squadrons for over 1,400 men deployed by the Droit 4 squadrons. These are all 4 squadrons, 480 men, Le Fernet Abcon, backing the left wing's reserve, equipped with carbines slung for mounted action or dismounted musketry when necessary. With this complicated terrain, as we will see, this will be actually very important. Then you had the 8 batteries with 45 heavy guns, including 4 howitzers, 450 men. The Royal Artillerie Chabré lined the Varkberg's eastern slope. Their 12 and 24 pounders positioned to enfilade attackers, gunners stacking round shots and canister beside smoldering lint stocks, with 16 Saxon 4-pounders, 460 men in total on the left, lighter guns suited for rapid repositioning in the wooded terrain. Then you had the light troops, 450 men, the Volontaires d'Alsace, skirmishing near Villebel, firing scattered 65 caliber carbine shots from hedgerows, exploding cover-to-harass advancing enemies with a detachment unknown in strength of the Chasseurs de Fischer at Kilianstetten and Eptingen Infanterie, 400 men garrisoning Frankfurt back there, manning particularly the city walls with muskets and light 3-pounders. Breuer planned to hold such position, leveraging especially Bergen's stone defenses and the Nidda's natural barrier, but prepared at the same time a retreat route in case things would have gone wrong to the Friedberger Warte and across the Main River, hoping for Saint-Germain's corps, 10,000 men, to reinforce him on the same April the 13th. Their approach, by the way, signaled at this point by distant hoofbeats and dust clouds, so they were really visible incoming. Of course, this pressured the Allied themselves. They were aware of the proximity of French reinforcement, so it was either now or never. In fact, the Allied army assembled east of Kilianstetten at dawn on Good Friday, with a sharp crack of sergeant's halberd aligning ranks echoing through the morning chill. Each fusilier carried 20 cartridges, each grenadier 60, their 75 caliber muskets and grenades weighing heavily in leather pouches, ready for sustained fire or shock assaults. Also here, the pressure was very high, morally speaking. Ferdinand's plan, finalized the previous evening, assigned the hereditary prince to lead the vanguard that was constituted by 2,200 men. The Novaren Jäger Corps, 3 mounted coys, 240 men, 6-foot coys, 600. The Hessian Grenadiers, 100 men. The Hessian Leib-Dragoner, 6 squadrons, 600 men in total. Brunswick Converged Grenadier Battalion Dennis, 600 men. Battalion Kram, 600. 2 6-pounders, 1 12-pounder. Then you would have 8,100 men in the left column under Prince von Isenburg. We're talking about the Hessian Converged Grenadier Battalion von Mirbach, 600 men. The Novaren Dachenhausen Dragoons, 4 squadrons, 600 men. Hammerstein cavalry, 2 squadrons, 300 men. The Hessian Prince Friedrich dragoons, 6 squadrons against 600. Prussian cavalry, 2 squadrons, same size, 300, of course. Leib-Regiment cavalry, same. Prince Wilhelm cavalry, same. Then you had the Novarian Post, Linstrup, Monroy, Vrede, Fersen, each 600 men. Hessian Prince Karl, Prince Isenburg, Kanitz, Hessen, Hanau, each 600 men, with 11 12-pounders. Finally, you would have on the right the Duke of Holstein-Gottorp with 5,200 men. We're talking the Hessian Jäger, for 400 men, the Volontaires de Prusse. We don't know how many these were specifically. The Prussian Rouge Black Hussars, this was 1 squadron, 150 men. Hessian Grenadier Battalion Faust, 600. Prussian Holstein Gottorp Dragoons, 5 squadrons, 750 men. The Finkenstein Dragoons, same. Hessian Guard Leib Grenadiers, Prince Leib Regiment Gilsa, each 600 men, targeting a 6 a.m. assault. Their columns forming under the low rumble of artillery wheels on uneven ground. At 6 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel von Freitag's Jägers, 840 men, and 2 squadrons of Prussian Rouge Black Hussars, 300 men, advanced along the highway towards Bergen. Their carbines and sabers poised for skirmishing, boots crunching on gravel, engaging French light troops. At 6 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel von Freitag's Jägers and 2 squadrons of Prussian Rouge Black Hussars advanced along the highway towards Bergen, their carbines and sabers poised for skirmishing, boots crunching on gravel, the spirits buoyed by the prospect of a swift strike, confident in their skirmishing prowess, engaging on the other side French light troops as well, the Volontaires d'Alsace. Musketry fire at this point intensified. The rapid pop of 65 caliber carbines answered by heavier 69 caliber musket volleys, smoke starting to obscure the tree line, and the Volontaires' resolve holding firm despite the Jägers' aggressive push, and Freitag's forces occupying Marköbe, northeast of Bergen, pushing back the Volontaires d'Alsace at this point from forests near Kilianstetten, Niederdolfenden, and the Am Hohenstein height, using pine cover to reload and fire in loose order, maintaining their cohesion, their morale high from early success and disciplined training. So the French skirmishers are gradually getting the worst of this. By 7:30 a.m., Freitag's report revealed, however, a strong French presence, in fact, at this point, fully revealing the 30,000 men, and especially their well-entrenched positions. This was really impacting at this point, the Allied morale to a degree. In fact, Freitag's troops had properly described the French entrenchments bursting with bayonets and cannon muzzles, dampening immediately Allied optimism as the scale of French defenses became clear, prompting Ferdinand to order the hereditary prince to seize the Am Hohenstein Heights, a rocky ridge offering elevation for artillery and observation. This seemed directionally immediately the sort of most obvious movement. As we were saying before, if you control the high ground, especially in these, as you understand, additional clashes, really the main way out of this this situation. If you win the Hohenstein, you have substantial chances of getting the upper hand, even on such a superior enemy, just to inflict more losses on them. At this point, the main bodies columns under Isenburg and the Holstein-Gottorp, so in total we're talking over 13,000 men, were instructed to march toward Bergen. Their muskets shouldered in tight ranks, drums signaling advance over muddy fields. This is in open ground, as you see. Their confidence bolstered by, if anything, Ferdinand's presence and the rhythmic beat of drums. I made a video about the Dionysian trance that drums induced the infantry in during this march towards literal hell. At 8 a.m., Freytag's detachment, 1140 men, slightly engaged, secured the Am Hohenstein. Its crest ranked by sporadic French musket fire from below, repulsing repeated attacks by Volontaires d'Alsace that at this point are definitely fatigued, their carbines firing inaccurately under pressure. We talked about this, right? The radical divide between, say, training accuracy and combat accuracy. Their morale waning as losses mounted and Allied pressure persisted. By the way, consider the enemy again has been battling through this tough terrain, rising. So the French had really felt like the high spirits of the Allies on this more difficult terrain. Broglie convened his senior commanders, Lieutenant General de Beaupre, with his over 3,800 cavalry, Lieutenant General Prince Camille de Laurent, over 10,000. This is the right-wing troops, and Lieutenant General Baron von Diern, 5,400 left-wing troops, and Major General Chevalier Pelletier, 450 artillery. Near the Bergen headquarters, a stone tower overlooking the battlefield's smoked haze expands, issuing orders and urging Saint-Germain to hasten his march. Given the Allied advance, their resolve stiffened by Broglie's calm leadership and fortified positions in this circumstance. So the French were starting to feel the pressure of the Allied onslaught, and they were receiving a report, witnessing probably the withdrawal of the Volontaires d'Alsace on the Am Hohenstein. At that point, the hereditary prince, in his 2,200 men, seconded by Major General von Gilsa and accompanied by Ferdinand, led the advance of the Allies from Kilianstetten, their grenadiers' mitre caps bobbing as they navigated the hedgerows, with 2 grenadier companies, 200 men, that is the Prince von Anhalt Mansbach, Hessian Leib-Dragoon, 600 men, Convert Brunswick Grenadier Battalions Den and Kram, 1,200 men, 2 6-pounders and 1 12-pounder under Captain von Himhoff's command, the guns wheeling, grinding as crews primed fuses, their elite status fueling high morale and eagerness for action. An unknown number of detachments were sent towards Friedberg, Gissen, and Hanau. The main bodies advanced with 1st Zastrow Infantry, 600 men, at its head, assembled slowly under Isenburg and Holstein-Gottorp, delayed by uneven terrain and hedgerow bottlenecks, their confidence strained by delays, but sustained by disciplined formation that at this point had remained intact. Isenburg's column followed the vanguard, marching slightly to its right, their musket glinting in the rising sun, their spirits lifted by the prospect of a coordinated assault on the French positions. By 9 a.m., the Allied vanguard reached the Am Hohenstein height, right? So getting probably on top where Freytag's Jägers, this 840 men engaged, were fighting south of Vilbel and north of Bergen. These are scattered fights between skirmishers and individual duels in the more generalized pattern. Their carbines snapping, rapid skirmish volleys, powder smoke stinging their eyes. Their morale steady, despite prolonged skirmishing bolstered by terrain advantage. Observing French reinforcements, at this point 3,600 men, we're talking the Royal Suédois and Planta that were, this sense, already engaged, their tight ranks delivering disciplined musket volleys from orchard cover, their confidence unshaken by Allied probes, fortified by stone walls. Ferdinand sent 2 grenadier companies, the stormtroopers of the situations, 200 men that were, however, by this point already fatigued, and the Leib-Dragoons that were instead fresh, like 600, to support Freytag's efforts, aiming to keep the French occupied, if anything. Gradual effort, with steady pressure, the Dragoons' sabers drawn for a potential charge, their fresh state restoring the Jägers' resolve in particular. From the Am Hohenstein vantage point, Ferdinand assessed the French positions, squinting through cannon smoke to count enemy banners, but underestimating their strength at 3,500 men only. In fact, missing in all this the actual reserves that were further across, especially in the northwest, as you see from the map, additionally would have brought, in fact, to over to 6,700 further men. As you see again, west of Bergen do, if anything, at this point, limited visibility. The orchard cover proper obscuring the lines, right? So Ferdinand's miscalculation here, sowing seeds of overconfidence among his staff entirely. Because again, the Allies do not have the full grasp of, at least of the entirety of the French forces, or at least where they're actually deployed. They know that they have to hurry up if they want to make things work. But that's exactly the point. They're starting, as we've seen, to encounter the more fortified positions and the greatest resistance. In fact, believing the French were still concentrating their forces, Ferdinand ordered Isenberg to attack Bergen's eastern side. The hereditary prince, that was already, as we've seen, engaged, the northern one, and Freytag with his 800 men to secure Wilbel and the Nidda River Bridge in the north. This to anchor for, let's say, the position on the higher ground. Freytag's Jägers swiftly captured Wilbel, wading through shallow waters under scattered carbine fire, leaving a detachment of 100 fresh men to hold the bridge with muskets loaded and bayonets fixed, and advancing south through the forest. Naturally uneasily defendable choking points, at least for capable of holding that position for a while, and advancing with the bulk of their force, the remainder 700 men, south through the forest. Naturally, there were engagements pretty much scattered all around, but we're talking again lighter troops, and so it's a more fluid picture. At this point, their morale was surging from the quick victory, while Captain von Lisingen's Jäger Company and his 100 fresh men remained stationed on the Am Hohenstein, properly top, scanning the valley with spyglasses, so acting as the main radar here. Their vigilance reflecting high discipline, by the way. By 9:30, intense French fire from orchards around Bergen, we're talking the aforementioned Royal-Suédois Planta, there was pretty manifest, their volleys tearing through foliage with a deafening crack, ending up to alarm Ferdinand, and that at this point was really shaken in his confidence by the French firepower in this very strong defensive position. So Ferdinand sends Lisingen's Jäger, that are just 100 men, and 100 grenadiers, though, fresh reserve to probe the enemy's strength, only to be, however, repulsed by superior French numbers. Again, we're talking 3,600 men, steady, their muskets blazing in synchronized salvos, their morale bolstered by successful defense. Right? These guys are holding their ground pretty effectively. At 9:45, the hereditary prince ordered von Gilsa to advance with converged grenadier battalions then in Kram. There are 1,200 fresh men and 2 6-pounders, the guns unlimbered to fire case shot into French lines, supported by rallying Jägers and grenadiers. So we're talking something like additional 300 men fatigued at this point by previous combat. Their resolve stiffened by the prince's leadership, though. Emerging from the Am Hohenstein cover, they faced heavy bombardment from 45 French guns, including 4 howitzers, So this were a total of 450 crewmen. Their 24-pounders and howitzers roaring, sending canister and explosive shells into Allied ranks, shattering Grenadier confidence as men fell screaming, their limbs torn apart. This was countered feebly by Lieutenant Kluver's 6-pounders and 1 12-pounders. These were comparatively just 1/9 of the French firepower. Their lighter shot bouncing off Bergen's defenses, further eroding Allied gunners' morale, though. In front of this unequal confrontation, despite losses, these combined forces captured orchards and farms in their advance, reaching the eastern sunken road, its muddy banks slick with blood and spent cartridges. Their initial success briefly lifting spirits, but being halted at Bergen's fortified walls by abattis and point-blank musketry from the Royal Suédois and Planta, 1,800 men staying in their position, their volleys shredding Allied lines at 20 meters with enfilading canister shots from the Wartburg, causing the loss of their 2 6-pounders and having these allies retreat with significant casualties. The remainder of this allied detachment was basically 800 men, battered obviously in their withdrawal, their ranks choked with smoke and littered with fallen, their morale collapsing, especially under relentless French fire and heavy losses. Broglie, observing from the Berger Warte command post through a haze of artillery smoke, his confidence reinforced by Allied disarray, deployed 7 battalions, counting more than 3,100 men. Piedmont, 1,800, Royal-Roussillon, 450, Alsace, 900. These are all fresh forces that are, in fact, deployed northwards, plus 4 battalions, 1,800 men consisting of the Castellas, 900 men at Diesbach, the same other fresh forces, instead south of Bergen, their bayonets fixed as they maneuvered through narrow streets, their fresh state-boosting French resolve. Planta and Royal Suédois pressing Gilsa's beleaguered forces, their muskets firing rolling volleys, their morale high from repulsing the enemy, which retreated across the sunken road under intense regimental gunfire, by the way, the air ringing with the ping of musket balls on stone. You can imagine how the Allied spirits within this unit was breaking, especially under the pursuit, right? That was showing here basically what was turning into a rout. Ferdinand, witnessing the formidable French strength, so this over 10,000 men, and the arrival of Swiss battalions, that accounts for other 1,800, their distinctive redcoats, by the way, visible through the orchards. This was a time which, of course, uniforms had a very strong importance psychologically, because this was a moment in which you wanted to show who you were on the battlefield, and we will explain this further, but we made multiple videos on the meaning of uniforms and the fact that it's a honor, of course, to be spotted by enemy, not something that you have to hide, especially if you're heavy infantry here and you have to engage frontally. This all added to the effect. And at this point, Ferdinand's resolve wavered as the losses were mounting. He essentially rushed back to the Am Hohenstein and sent the 1st Zastrow Infantry, 600 fresh men under Lieutenant Colonel von Kalm, to counter the Swiss that were arriving south of Bergen. Zastrow's rapid advance to counter the enemy breakthrough under Berger Warte's artillery fire, canister rounds tearing gaps in their ranks, tested, of course, the Allied infantry discipline, but this unit held firm and actually succeeded to drive the Swiss back into Bergen's defenses, at least, which were solid, as we've seen, rallying Gilsa's battered forces, so that those 800 men had been effectively being broken. Their muskets at this point reloaded amidst shouts and chaos, their morale briefly restored, at least by this Zastrow's success, which pushed to within 100 paces of Bergen's village walls. To Piedmont battalions in the 1st Royal Roussillon from the French side, we're talking in total 2,200 men that had already been engaged, advanced then along Bergen's main street to counter once again the Zastrov, but were repulsed by a devastating close-range volley. In fact, the Allied muskets were falling dozens in seconds in this close quarter combat where you could channel firepower across the streets, briefly shaking French confidence and temporarily halting their counterattacks. The Allied units, so at this point in this sector, talking 1,400 men, as we've seen, but importantly disorganized, because in part, as we've seen, they had been previously broken, others they had come, they were now heated and just deployed in Bergen streets, and especially unsupported by the distant main body of the Allied force, faced a renewed French pressure, their lines starting to waver under musket smoke and screams, and their morale crumbling as isolation and losses overwhelmed them. After all, they were against a superior enemy in numbers. 4 French grenadier companies, by the way, from the 400 men, as we've seen, Piedmont Royal Roussillon, that were fresh, plus the Allied battalions of over 2,200 men, attacked from the village, their grenades bursting among Allied ranks, further eroding Allied resolve. This was particularly the case as a close range, of course, like, in street battles, you throw grenades to great effect, with concentrated troops squeezed in this narrow choke points or inside the houses, etc. While Broglie committed 4 further reserve battalions, essentially the Rohan Montbazon, the Boisvesy, both 900 men for a total of 1,800, to support the Dauphin Brigade, that were of the same size with the Dauphin and Enghien, advancing from the left wing to Bergen's western outskirts, so to essentially outflank enemy positions in the same village. Rohan Montbazon maneuvered along the northern walls. In fact, while Beauvaisis marched through the town, reinforcing the eastern side, 3,600 men, steady, their disciplined volleys cutting down exposed allies, whose morale was sinking while the French one was surging from coordinated action against them. Combined arms tactics is always there. Gilsa's 1,400 men battle forces were overwhelmed, suffering devastating casualties, including the same von Gilsa, von Kalm, and 8 officers wounded. This force retreats, their ranks stumbled over fallen comrades and broken abattis. Panic at this point spreading as officers were falling, and as the Royal Suédois, 900 steady troops were pursuing them. This forces without a leader, with their officers' skaters collapsing, lost control of the sunken road, and their 2-pounders that were abandoned in the mud under French fire, their rout deepening despair. During these eastern clashes, the hereditary prince's division, these 2,200 men already engaged, deployed on the Am Hohenstein, its rocky slopes offering at least partial cover from French artillery, deviating from Ferdinand's original plan due to Isenberg's delay, to cover the embattled troops and secure the main body's advance. Their muskets primed for defensive volleys at this point, their morale strained but held by the prince's presence, because they were expecting, of course, a French counterattack, even though the Isenberg's troops were, again, still the major bulk here of the force, with 8,100 fresh men unengaged. Ferdinand urgently ordered, in fact, Isenberg to reinforce Gilsa's position. That was the one just collapsed. Isenberg's vanguard, the converged Grenadier Battalion von Mirbach, 600 men, 2 Ammerstein Cavalry Squadrons, 300 men, and 4 Dachenhausen Dragoons, 600 men, and 2 Rush Black Hussars, 300, attacked Bergen's northeastern corner, sabers flashing as cavalry charged through open fields, their confidence high from fresh state and shock tactics. At this point, a detachment of Dachenhausen dragoons, 100 men, entered Bergen itself via an open gate, but they are swiftly captured, overwhelmed by musket fire from stone walls, so caught right in close space by concentrated enemy fire. This sudden loss shook the Allied cavalry morale. This was a courageous infiltration, but again, you can't quite even just simply hold with even those dismounted men in case. Mirbach's timely arrival, however, rallied Gilsa's beleaguered troops. These guys had really seen a lot during this day. And the Allies consequently succeeded in retaking the sunken road. So reaching the abbey once again, their bayonets clashing against French defenses, and their spirit lifted by reinforcement. However, as you understand, the situation was not the best for them, and they were repulsed again by fierce French resistance. Volleys and canister shredding the Allied ranks, renewed losses sapping the enemy resolve. Ferdinand ordered Isenberg to set Bergen ablaze at this point, to at least make the scorched earth tactics against the French, especially as heavy artillery had arrived, dispatching Captain Murat to hasten the guns' deployment. We're talking 11, 12 pounders that had been delayed, but were now approaching the location. If anything, the crews had been struggling to maneuver over rutted paths, their urgency reflecting naturally Ferdinand's desperate hope at least to regain some momentum, but it was evident that the French had won at Bergen. By 10:15 a.m., 4.5 Allied battalions, that is 2,700 men, 6 squadrons, 900 men, 2 Hussar squadrons, 300 and Jaegers, 740, the latter having already been engaged, fought desperately in the orchards against superior French forces, the aforementioned over 10,000. Musket bolts splintering trees and canister rounds mowing down ranks, while Juan Montbazon, that was still fresh, attacked Mirbach's exposed right flank. Their volleys enfilading the Allied line, plunging Allied morale into chaos as flanks were collapsing. Isenberg's division, the awaited 8,100 men, deployed on the Am Hohenstein's southeastern slope at this point alongside the hereditary prince's forces, under heavy French artillery fire. They were fresh, as we've seen, which initially sustained their confidence, even under the serious fire. French artillery, the Royale Artillerie, 450 men, advanced 200 meters along the western sunken road. At this point, their guns unleashing a barrage of round shot and canister, unleashing really devastating fire on Isenberg's advancing troops that are also well compact, and they don't have really a great terrain to fall back on because they're literally descending the Am Hohenstein. And so this massively concentrated French fire into probably all this meat shattered Isenberg's troops' resolve, as men were literally falling in droves. Isenberg launched his Hanoverian battalions, 3,000 men, Fersen, Monroy, Red, Lindström Post, all fresh, into the orchards, their muskets firing in disciplined volleys. Joining, by the way, Gilsa's and Mirbach's embattled forces, this battered 3,700 men at that point had, as we've seen, coagulated gradually during all those backs and forths in and around Bergen. And so initially, as always, as reinforcements arrived, discipline and say really bolsters morale, and there is a moment of rejoicing. But under relentless fire from French artillery and infantry, the air thick with smoke and the screams of the wounded, the Allied ranks soon disintegrated, and French forces enveloped their exposed flanks, bayonets thrusting in close combat, panic erupting as formations broke. By the way, we're often told how bayonets charges would have been allegedly rare. If you actually study 18th century warfare, they weren't rare at all, right? And they were actually not just part of the habitual training doctrine. We've seen it very well, especially in the case of Prussia, but in general, right, in such large engagements, were definitely not something rare to find, as it's sometimes presented. In this carnage, Isenberg himself was tragically killed. So we see the Allies actually losing significant leaders, including Lieutenant Colonels Marschalk, Vred, and others. These were, as we've seen, all guys at the head of the respective units. Their bodies falling amid spent cartridges. Other officers, really falling and triggering widespread despair among the troops. Morard heroically retrieved Isenberg's body amid the chaos, dodging musket fire. We have this epic scenery, like properly showing what these men were made of. And in fact, Morard's bravery briefly even inspired the nearby troops to say what we're capable of doing for self-sacrifice and mutual nobiliary recognition. This was an important thing. We've seen it also in the video about the French musketeers. Other troops would have not fully understood, but they would have found it incredibly inspiring. Remember, these are the aristocrats that lead the men, that these men are following. And so it's a great example. The Allied forces at this point are routing. Imagine 3,000 men running away, losing, by the way, in the process, 2 of Vredder's and 1 of Fersen's battalion guns. The French relentlessly pursuing them with the Rohan Montmazon and Beauvaisis 1,800 men, their muskets blazing in the process, and their morale, by the way, soaring from the Allied rout. From his vantage point on the Am Hohenstein, imagine the sight, by the way. Ferdinand, fearing at this point a French general assault, because all the Allied positions were basically compromised, and the majority of them, as now also the size of the entire French force was becoming clearer, in spite of the horizon being clouded with cannon smoke, because reports had been gathering consistent information now by an overwhelming force. Ferdinand's confidence faltered as defeat loomed, so that he urgently ordered the hereditary prince, with his 2,200 engaged men, to prepare defensive positions, if anything, digging shallow entrenchments with bayonets, even as desperately as it sounds, and Major General von Urf to instead charge with 2 Hessian Leib Regiment cavalry squadrons that are 300 men, fresh in reserve, and 2 Prince Friedrich Dragoon squadrons, other 300 fresh men, that are also high in morale, still fueling at least a desperate local counterattack. Urf's bold charge shattered the Beauvaisis, and these were 700 men that are practically broken. Imagine sabers slashing through disordered ranks, capturing at this point 150 prisoners in the process. So this shows how dangerous even immediate pursuits during counterattacks could really be, what enemy fresh reserves around. We talked abundantly in this by commenting on the Funkrieg, lifting Allied spirits momentarily, but eventually withdrawing under withering fire from the Royal Suédois, this steady 1,000 men, their muskets firing from behind stone walls, retaining their prisoners, their steady resolve unshaken. All right, so cavalry, of course, has the worst against infantry at this point. And also, just the numbers here are evidently in favor of the bulkier the bulkier unit. The hereditary prince, assuming command of Isenberg's Hessian infantry, that is, as we've seen before, 3,600 men, Prince Karl, Prince Isenberg, Kanitz, Hessen, Hanau, each 900 fresh men, advanced to halt Rohan Montbazon's pursuit, thereby stabilizing the line, their fresh state-restoring order, enabling at least the Allied retreat. We're talking thousands of men that were still routing. This aspect is important because you always have in battle somebody who sacrifices themselves and or at least manages to hold the enemy, to buy time for a larger part of the army to flee. Broglie, disapproving of his infantry's unauthorized advance that, as we've seen, had also partly jeopardized their position, repositioned 10 central cavalry squadrons, so 1,200 fresh men, 400 meters from the sunken road. Their horses held in tight formation, ready to shock charge, their restraint, if anything, reflecting Broglie's confidence in victory. In fact, this force was ready to attack in case things went worse, but they would not actually engage, as the situation did not quite require it. It was just like a security measure. Ferdinand, with his adjutants Bülow, Derenthal, and Schlieffen, rallied the retreating troops, shouting orders over the din of musketry, his leadership stemming panic, as a matter of fact, appointing Major General von der Schulenburg to replace the fallen Isenberg. Schulenburg's cavalry, 800 men, Prince Friedrich Dragoons, Pruschenk, Leib-Regiment, Prince Wilhelm, all fresh, withdrew under intense French artillery fire. The aforementioned 450 artillerists, canister rounds whistling overhead, imagine, the difficult. But these Allied fresh reserves holding despite pressure when, in fact, they were seeing that the French cavalry would not advance. This is important because Broglie himself was essentially signaling what the point was, like, retreat. We're not risking here to go at you in this moment. As we've seen, something wrong had happened with the French infantry in pursuit, showing that the Allies were basically broken, but they weren't by totality. And by the way, this is far from over. By 11 a.m., Holstein's Gottrop's column, we're talking 5,200 men, led by Prince von Hanoth with Converged Grenadier Battalion Faust, 600 fresh men, Hessian Gardeinfanterie, other 600 freshmen, and Hessian Grenadier Regiment, same, reached the Am Hohenstein, forming in linear ranks under French artillery fire, just like it had happened to Isenberg's forces. As you understand, this is another solid chunk of the Allied force, basically the last resort. Their purpose being properly reinforcing Schulenburg's left wing, this 3,600 fresh men. The arrival of course, Holstein Gottorp's column boosted Allied morale. They opened fire on the retreating Rohan Montbazon that had still not basically rallied, and the Allied muskets delivering a crushing volley, further weakening the French resolve. Those forces still were resisting. By the way, fatigued forces, as we've seen, had seen their share of action, to say the least, and having been previously battered. Holstein Gottorp's division formed the Allied right wing, and 4 12-pounders, 50 freshmen, countered the French artillery, that, however, was still overwhelmingly superior. They were like 9 times more, and they were steady. The Allied round shot slamming into Bergen's defenses, boosting Allied morale despite being outmatched. Ferdinand, at this point, withdrew his battered troops for a total of 15,000 men. That is 3/4 of his entire force behind the Am Hohenstein Ridge to avoid further losses, because, of course, the French would have, with great difficulty, just crossed the ridge. Few forces were sufficient to buy a lot of time. By the way, all this broader allies units reformed their ranks amidst spent powder, abandoned equipment, as we've seen, moving back across at least the hills where they had been. Some of at least the lighter forces had been fighting before. Their spirits low, but at least stabilized by now the retreat by the, in a safer part of the battlefield, hoping still at this point, if anything, to lure Broglie from his strong positions into some hot-headed attack on these heights. The Allies even halted their artillery fires. We've seen a few guns actually to deceive Broglie, who, of course, suspecting that even another Allied attack, like not baiting and actually thinking that this could have been a trap, held his formidable positions, 30,000 men, their muskets and cannon primed, their morale unshaken by Allied withdrawal. This may seem objectively overly cautious, but you may really never know, because as we will see now, the losses suffered by the French were not that small. By noon, Ferdinand reconnoitred Broglie's left wing, 5,400 men. That is, Saxon troops, as we've seen, mainly, that were fresh at this point. They had virtually not participated to the battle. Their ranks also visible through gaps in the Nidda woods, where Allies scouts were still spying on the enemy position. Ferdinand's caution reflecting, of course, the battered confidence of a lost battle. That's when he ordered, by the way, his artillery to bombard Bergen's defenses and target especially the Saxon artillery positions, which is something relatively rare to do and sort of desperate, because artillery versus artillery was not really considered doctrinally a thing. You have, however, these 50 men that can basically target both Bergen's at least larger building positions and this other Saxon artillery that were sort of thrice more than them. The Saxons, however, answered with their 4-pounders with rapid counter-fire. Saxon gunners resolved steady despite losses they had partially suffered. Freitag's Jägers, that are still there, this 700 men engaged in a duel even with the Saxon guns, right? And this is an interesting one. In fact, the Jägers' carbines snapping from tree cover, their morale sustained by skirmishing success, because of course artillery had it easier at closer range against especially a concentrated heavy infantry approaching. You could use mitraille, but against skirmishers it was kind of trickier. And so there was a thin balance to a degree, whereby you couldn't simply make artillerists advance against skirmishers. Broglie, anticipating another attack on Bergen, from this situation ordered Lieutenant General von Deern to advance 6 Saxon battalions. We're talking 2,700 men. The Garde zu Fuß, Kurprinzessin, Prince Friedrich August, Prince Karl Maximilian, Prince Joseph, Prince Anton. We're talking each of them 400 fresh men toward the Am Hohenstein's northwestern slope. Right, you had a solid core of French troops at Bergen and around with some unspent reserves, including cavalry. So let's essentially send the Saxon in on the uphill and see what happens. Because if we risk those, at least not too much is gonna happen, even from a disaster. The Saxon advance was in fact slowed down by muddy underbrush. Their confidence high but tested by especially terrain. Besides, Deern was severely wounded during the advance, falling under Jäger carbine fire. This shocked Saxon morale. Deern was still alive, by the way, by this point. He retreated essentially without success. He would later succumb to his wounds. Ferdinand's planned assault on Broglie's left wing was cancelled. In this circumstance, regardless of, again, the Saxon losses due to mostly impassable terrain, saying that had bothered the Saxons, and even if we're talking about going down the slope, but again, it's not like the Saxon forces have been really shattered to the point of in fact, not gaining an advantage on the open ground below. In fact, the same Allied forces were essentially hampered by the passable terrain, thick woods, and boggy ground, further dampening their spirits. So that's the bulk of Allied forces, the aforementioned 15,000, withdrew for good behind the Am Hohenstein Ridge. Broglie, at this point, was still cautious because he thought that from that position the Allies could at least attempt an attack on Wilpel. So he shifted 6 reserve battalions, that is 2,700 men, the Anhalt, 900 men, Berg 450, Royal Bavière 900, Nassau Prince Louis 450. These were all fresh, right? Tells you how much force the French had to spend. To his center, reinforcing the linear formations in open ground. So strengthening the French lines, both in morale and manpower. The Saxon artillery, by the way, those 160 artillerists reinforced by 2 heavy guns that had never stopped firing at this point, targeted the Allied right wing that was still inside. We're talking of remaining 5,200 men, still fresh, by the way, this hadn't been engaged. Their shots tearing to Hessian ranks, testing the latter's resolve. It's interesting, of course, like the range of artillery fire at this point. We made multiple videos on this. Ferdinand, interpreting these movements as a prelude to a French counterattack, realized how actually dynamic even this this apparently but still rudimentary linear tactical deployments really were. Briefly advanced his forces, so great part of his basically 15,000 battered men, again over the Am Hohenstein Ridge. Their muskets mostly reloaded for a defensive stand. They didn't have any intention to sort of descend once again. Besides, their morale was really fragile. They were exhausted in many ways. They had this, again, other fort of unspent forces supporting them, but they withdrew again, leaving also their artillery there. Their guns essentially covering their retreat. These crewmen discipline holding firm in the process, by the way. This helped. By the way, the day was at a close. By 6 p.m., all 21 Allied field guns we're talking 100 men roughly, were actively firing, sustaining a prolonged artillery duel with the French, signaling, however, that the rest of the engagement was practically over. Again, artillery was actually in linear tactics the least lethal, right? The least mortal of the various arms involved. You could feel the air vibrating with cannon roars. This artillery fire from the Allied side actually preserved the army cohesion. Despite exhaustion, in fact, the fact that the French would remain where they were, would not attempt to go uphill to settle this matter, allowed the Allies to maintain some coordination, to withdraw in some order. The Allies buried their fallen in the process and evacuated their wounded, that counted to 1,943 men. Moving to Windecken, except for those severely injured to be transported, imaging left amidst blood-soaked fields, their losses weighing heavily on survivors' spirits. Imagine just the shock of the day of this brutal engagement. Broglie dispatched General D'Abchamps with 2 dragoon regiments, 960 men, fresh, to reinforce the Chasseurs de Fichères. We don't know how many these were, but they were also like a fresh unit deployed at Friedberg, which secured the supply lines under cover of dusk, safeguarding, especially Friedberg, vital magazines. This swift action reinforcing French confidence in a broader operational and strategical sense. As darkness descended, artillery fire gradually diminished, by the way, also because they couldn't see even what they were shooting at. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke, in silence, both sides' morale settling to weary exhaustion. 10,000 men finally arrived late on the same April the 13th to reinforce Broye, so really bolstering the French line and lifting their spirit. The French army had held its position. At 10 p.m. in the evening, the Allies fully retreated in two columns, their footsteps heavy on muddy paths, their morale again to the ground, but still, controlled under Ferdinand's command, with him and the hereditary prince remaining with the rear guard until 1 a.m. on April the 14th. The French, bolstered by Saint-Germain's arrival, did not pursue the Allies. In fact, they were confident just in their further advance later, and the Allies therefore could encamp between Killingstetten and Rosdorf, with their campfires being visibly flickering in the night. But still a resolve, still, however, tempered by defeat. So we'll look at the losses of the battle. The Allied ones totaled 18 officers and 422 men killed, 106 officers and 1837 men wounded. Notice the proportion here of officers that had exposed themselves, like in front of the men, and they compared even just to the 18 to the 422. It's more, interestingly enough, meaning that in some sense they had been lucky as well. 200 men missing, also because they would have been killed or they were deserters. 5 guns lost, abandoned in the chaos of retreat, deepening the army's sense of failure, because at that time you start counting casualties in a serious sense. French losses this is the main notion to have been possibly underestimated. They included 500 dead, 1,300 wounded, 4 officers and 164 men captured, and 4 guns lost, with Planta and Royal Suédois, 1,800 men nearly annihilated, their ranks decimated by musket and canister fire, their heavy casualties straining French morale despite victory, and Lieutenant General von Deernd, as we've seen before, mortally wounded from the Saxon side, the Prince Camille de Lorraine injured in combat. Broye's later report suggested up to 5,000 casualties, as a matter of fact, though contemporary estimates place losses at 2,500, 3,000, suggesting, actually a pretty good work from the Allied side, likely mostly because of the ground seized early on the Hohenstein, and also this fierce fight at Bergen. So the sense is that, in a way, the Allies would have had some sort of more qualitative performance, and the French mostly winning because of their numbers, but this is also sort of a reductive view of the war. This was a pretty sound Allied defeat. In any case, the French wounded were littering Bergen's streets, their resolve tempered by costly defense, if anything, on their side. Ferdinand's attempt to dislodge the French had failed. Right, strategically, this was a defeat. So Ferdinand withdrew towards Minden. Tactically speaking, of course, they had been defeated as well. They had left the field and withdrawn, really. His army battered, but at least orderly, their morale low, but intact under leadership. So the Allied had lost both tactically and strategically, but they had managed to save their army in the process. This left Broye in firm control of Bergen and Frankfurt, which was, as we've seen, the major regional point of this. Their defense is intact, French spirits hide from repulsing the assault, and so making the Battle of Bergen a victory in the annals of French military history. Speaking of the aftermath of the conclusion, the Battle of Bergen concluded essentially with significant strategic and political repercussions for both the Allied coalition and the French during the 7 Years' War. Despite the fierce engagement that we have seen near the fortified village of Bergen, the Allied army under Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick had essentially failed to dislodge the French forces commanded by Victoire François Duc de Broglie, resulting in a resounding French defensive victory that solidified their control over Frankfurt and Hesse as a consequence. The aftermath of the battle shaped the subsequent campaign in Western Germany, influenced the broader dynamics of the war, and underscored the challenges faced by the Allied coalition in their efforts to counter French ambitions. Strategically, the Allied defeat at Bergen marked a significant setback for Ferdinand's bold winter campaign, supported by increased British subsidies post-battle to disrupt French operations by severing their supply lines through Frankfurt. The Allied army, numbering approximately 22,000 men with 1,900 light troops, suffered grievous casualties, as we've seen. The failure to capture Bergen, a critical choke point on the road to Frankfurt, forced Ferdinand to abandon his ambitious plan to drive the French from Hesse. His subsequent withdrawal towards Minden, where he would regroup and later engage the French at the Battle of Minden on August the 1st of the same year, reflected a temporary shift to a more defensive posture. The Battle of Minden, by the way, is also very, very interesting, and it represents, say, the other flip of the coin. This would be, in fact, an Allied victory. The French losses at Bergen strained, in spite of the victory, Broglie's resources for later engagement. However, Broglie's ability to hold Bergen, reinforced by Saint-Germain's corps, arriving, as we've seen, at the end of the same day of battle, preserved French control over Frankfurt, securing their vital logistical base and enabling continued operations in Hesse. The arrival of Saint-Germain's corps and Broglie's decision to reinforce Friedberg's magazines with General Dapschon dragoons underscored the French commitment to maintain their strategic foothold despite the high human cost temporarily boosting their morale. Politically, the outcome of Bergen bolstered French confidence and significantly strengthened their position within the anti-Prussian alliance alongside Austria and Saxony. The successful defense of Frankfurt, a key political and economic hub, enhanced France's leverage in potential peace negotiations and demonstrated their resilience to withstand Allied offensives, thus supporting Austria's border campaign against Prussia in the Eastern Theater. For the Allies, particularly Britain, Hanover, and Prussia, the defeat highlighted the formidable difficulties of coordinating a multinational coalition against a well-entrenched French army. The loss of key commanders, including Prince von Isenberg, and the wounding of others like Major General von Gils and Lieutenant Colonel von Kaun, strained Allied leadership, while the death of Saxon commander Lieutenant General von Diern and the wounding of Prince Camille de Lorraine added to the human toll on both sides. Britain's unwavering commitment to defending Hanover remained firm, but the failure at Bergen intensified political pressure on Ferdinand to deliver a crushing victory later in the campaign to justify Britain's substantial financial and military support, as evidenced by increased subsidies post-battle. For Prussia, the battle's outcome meant continued French pressure in Western Germany, diverting critical resources from their eastern struggle against Russia in Austria. For the rest, you've noticed how, compared to our usual sort of simpler medieval ancient battles, again, we talk also about early modern warfare, these armies are getting towards more the attritional, towards sort of the more contained reserve effort. This is the case mostly also because of the particularly complicated terrain that allowed for this sort of tit-for-tat and gradual attempt, let's say, to force things through a more gradual approach. But the clashes at Bergen also illustrate combined arms tactics, the brutality of combination of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. So it's also very, as we were saying before, like very much like a full 18th century battle. So if we could really say, mostly, however, characterized by these terrain features that were quite difficult, like, to exploit, especially for the attackers, needless to say. And that's where the seemingly high number of French losses stands out, because of course, if you see it, as we were saying at the beginning, other battles of the war, the French really struggled to obtain any other victory. This was essentially, I think, say, against a German force, this was essentially the greatest result out there. And it's always as if, the French had sort of lower quality in some ways. This is at least a perception. We know from sources that, again, French casualties may have been very high. And yes, there is some kind of bigger power kind of ability to play on numbers, as we've seen here, and therefore playing also mostly on that as opposed to something more necessarily sophisticated. But as we've seen, Broyes' command is pretty coherent, pretty cautious as well. It may have been also too cautious to an extent had he pressed on the Am Hohenstein, or generally speaking, had he launched other counterattacks with their cavalry. Who knows would have happened. But if especially this story that the French were taking particularly high losses is true, well, you look at the 30,000 men losing even, just 3,000, right? It's not a joke. And so during the day, I think that Broyes' attitude was actually correct, and or at least he did what he had to do without risking too much, and so with the mischance of a higher reward, but still, again, possibly also something different in terms of in case of defeat, right? So this is actually a very important point at the end of the day, and it's also quite instructive to see how these battles worked in general. As we've seen here, we have a pretty substantial understanding of the overall situation, and I would say the commanders involved are quite interesting. They're fundamentally sound choices. Also, Ferdinand was a pretty energetic, but also cold and calculating individual. Broy was, as we've seen here, cautious, understanding, with an acute, sharp vision what what's going on, and finding countermeasures, but not risking overly excessively, but having also some significant martial pulse. So it's a very interesting battle, and again, hopefully we're going to cover all the campaigns clashes to get a better grasp of how things evolved. I was really glad to talk about this, and again, in the organization of the video, again, something could have been improved. This was very useful for me also as far as the next videos of this kind are concerned. However, for today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.